1.2 Types of Democracy. So basically, with all the stuff we talked about in 1.1, we ended up with a representative democracy. This is a government in which the people entrust elective officials to represent their concerns. So basically, we're electing people to represent us. Now, there are 3 forms of representative democracies. So a participatory democracy relies on participation, like a lot of it, by a lot of the population. This means citizens in politics, that's like its emphasis. This is where citizens are voting directly on like laws rather than voting on people representing their ideas who like talk and create those laws. Framers of the Constitution, like the people who wrote it, they were like, okay, yeah, this is what we're gonna do, guys. That's who I'm referring to when I'm talking about the framers. Anyway, they were like, the US is too large for that. However, they did leave room for like oneself to participate in their own like self-expression at different levels and to be able to like represent themselves. And so in many places, in like cities and even states, voting matters in the sense that like you can vote directly on things to establish state laws and state constitutions. So in that sense, the participatory democracy type of voting, that can still and does still matter in our government. Now, in a pluralist democracy, second type, people find people with similar ideas to them. And they organize and create these interest groups, non-governmental groups, and they try to influence political decisions. So basically what they're doing is they are looking for different access points at various levels of government and competing in this marketplace of ideas to try to persuade these policymakers. And these groups form for all different types of reasons and pushing all different sorts of ideas. And because there are so many and because there's so much competition, the process of changing policy is usually pretty slow like this. But it does allow a whole different bunch of people to voice their interests and have a voice in government. But the framers, the founders, they were like, that's a lot of varying interests that could dominate government. And so they were like, we're going to limit the influence a little bit. So each state constitutes an interest. You know, in the Senate, each state has 2 representatives. House of Representatives, those are by states. But because it's so diverse, like geographically and like of views, it prevents a single interest dominating like the entirety of government. The Electoral College also does this, preventing this overpowering influence fueled by interest, which we get a little bit more into with the elite democracy model, because it demonstrates an elite element in the US government. So in elite democracy, those representatives that the people elected, they act as like trustees for those people. Basically, like they voice the people who elected them. This model recognized how people with more influence and more resources tend to dominate. Some people argue, though, that the elective representatives are still like well equipped to handle it because they usually have the skills and education to represent. So there's 2 different sides there that like the book points out. Those are like, it works well and it creates good representatives versus the representatives are only there because they have like the money and resources and influence. Anyway, they are in all 3 branches of government, or elite like models of democracy. The most democratic is the House of Representatives because its members are elected directly by the people. They have short terms, so they're like switched out and keep up with public opinion, and they represent geographically. Now, some tension over the models of democracy. We were already talking about how in elite democracy, the book kind of specifically points out 2 different sides of it. Now, the people making the Constitution were like, how are we going to get citizens to participate? Like, what is the best one? And they were arguing over, like, pros, cons, what's best, what works for us, what's not going to work for us, etc. And everyone had different ideas. The Constitution ended up with a strong central government, but still a focus on citizen participation. So, like, federal law is above all, but states can make their own laws that are not in conflict with that. And they have their own rights. Our central government kind of has an elite model of democracy, like how we were talking about the House of Representatives, because people are electing people to power. In the original Constitution, elected members of the state legislature, they elected U.S. citizens. Now they're elected by the people, but previously it was by senators. That's even, like, more elite. But the freedom of the states to make their own decisions is kind of giving participatory democracy. And then the lawmaking process kind of shows pluralism, because representatives and senators, they're all coming at this with different views and different geographical places, etc., and they're all negotiating agreements to pass laws. So there's, like, diversity, and that ends up finding agreement, like pluralism. Now, there was also a whole lot of tension between political beliefs with the people making it. This is important. This will come back later. Like, very important, I think, in, like, the next chapter, perchance. So, those who supported this constitutional structure, strong federal government, they were known as the Federalists. They were like, we want this. Federalists Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay wrote the Federalist Papers because of how much they wanted it, and they were trying to get other people to want it too. But of course, you have the other side. We're like, no, we don't want the Constitution. We are the anti-federalists, because they were very, like, pro-states individually, Articles of Confederation style. Robert Yates and William Lansing wrote their own newspaper articles. They thought in a large republic, there's no way all of our voices will be heard. In my book, there is a table. This one, page 13. I would recommend taking a look at this. That one. In hindsight, that was not the greatest idea, but I'm not going to be taking this class again. But you are probably in this class right now, so you might want to highlight that pretty neatly. Basically, it goes how participatory, pluralist, and elite democracy is reflected in the Constitution and how it was reflected in the ratification debates. I'll go over it at the end if it feels like there's time. Representative democracy in the U.S. today. First, participatory democracy. Initiatives give people the power to place a measure on the ballot for a popular vote, and the referendum allows citizens to contest the work of the legislator. Those are book definitions. Basically, initiative, I'm going to write my initiative to do something on the ballot so people can vote on it. Referendum is kind of like, we're going to argue and, like, talk about what's happening with this piece of legislature, and you can, in some states, like, petition and then call for a vote and see if it will be upheld. So that's people directly making an impact on the laws. Pluralist democracy. So people with interest form the special interest groups, and so they share political power that way. They raise and spend money and elect people that, like, share their ideas. They have professional researchers and experts, and they send them to, like, congressional committee hearings. They're buying ads and stuff. There are several groups with several purposes, and that shows how there's a diverse interests with, people coming together. And then elitism in government. When people became more involved in politics, like the masses of people, like lots of people got involved, the Constitution's elite government system kind of dropped a little bit, weakened. But it still kind of prevails in the way that most people with time, education, money, and access to the government can take and will take more action than the less privileged, and will be heard more because of their resources. So, like, those who are serving in a leadership position in a political party are usually at a higher socioeconomic level, better known, better educated than the rank and file, like the regular members of the group who constitute that, like, group's body. Okay, I'm gonna go over the table. Participatory is reflected in the Constitution and how states are free to determine how they're going to allow direct citizen involvement. Anti-federalists favored the smaller units of government because they were more responsive to the local needs. Our lawmaking process requires tons of compromise, very pluralist, and the federalists were like, competing views is unavoidable, so one thing we can do, though, is prevent one single viewpoint from dominating. Elite, we have elected representatives who are in charge with representing us. There's the Electoral College. Federalists liked this idea of regular elections, and they trusted that. But anti-federalists argued that only these smaller units can really represent well in that way. Thank you for watching. I hope this helped. I hope you learned something. I hope it worked as a great review. I have other videos just like this on the other chapters.